Hello ladies and gentlemen, I am the Omni viewer, and today I'm doing another author's take on video. This time about something I've occasionally had people bring up, and I think it really needs to be addressed. The subject today is expanded material, or multimedia tie-ins, or whatever you choose to call them. It's something that is spun off from the original core work that is technically not the official story, but a side story, which you can experience, but you don't necessarily have to. For example, if you've ever gone to see a movie and then you learn that there is a book or a comic that serves as a prequel to that movie, that's what I'm talking about right here. Or perhaps it is just viral material. That's been more and more prevalent these days. Viral websites and videos and stuff that ties into the main project and provides you with maybe some more information about the world, but isn't really part of the movie or the book or whatever it is in a full capacity. If you're still not entirely sure what I'm talking about, do you remember the Star Wars novels that comprise the Thrawn trilogy, which introduced the most famous Star Wars character to never appear in any of the films? That's the kind of thing I'm talking about. They are not officially the movies, but they tie into the movies. They're in a completely different medium. They're still technically part of the story and part of the universe, or at least they used to be, but they are not the actual core of the story. That's what I mean. Now, personally, I happen to like those sort of things. I'm a huge nerd, I admit that, and if there's a particular thing that I really enjoy, and I want to experience as much of it as possible, and I learn that there are ways I can experience it through different mediums, then yeah, if I'm able, I'm going to try experiencing that. I'm a big fan of the Monsterverse, for example. The Monsterverse has a prequel graphic novel for each movie it's gotten so far, and I own all of them. I'm a big fan of the Rush concept album Clockwork Angels, and I not only own the album on CD, I also own the novelization by Kevin J. Anderson and its sequel, Clockwork Lives. So yeah, I like these sort of things, but I do believe some clarifications need to be made about what purpose they serve, because I believe it's a mistake to put too much emphasis, too much importance on these tie-ins. This first came to my attention when I was trying to cover news about Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, back before Universal decided to claim one of my videos because I had accidentally guessed a major spoiler. But anyway, I occasionally ask questions like, why don't they just move the dinosaurs to Isla Sorna? Is that even still an option? In fact, have the Jurassic World movies retconned Jurassic Park 2 and 3 out of existence or not? It's hard to say, but I don't know. And I'd occasionally get people down in the comments saying, oh well, if you watch the viral marketing and you go to the websites that they tease and whatnot, you'll see that all the Jurassic movies are still canon, but there are all sorts of reasons why they can't be moved to Isla Sorna. That's Site B from The Lost World and Jurassic Park 3. And this was important because they were being elevated as the answers. This is the official reason, regardless of whether or not it actually gets mentioned in the movie, which, by the way, none of it ever was. It also popped up while I was covering the Godzilla anime trilogy, and I would occasionally mention things that just didn't make sense, and I would have certain people say, well, it's explained in those prequel novels, and I would say, okay, that's great and all, but this is kind of an important detail, so why wasn't it actually in the movie? Because not everyone's going to read the novels, and I'll expand on that point in a second. But that would often lead to all sorts of backlash from people saying that I was just, you know what, I'm not going to reopen old wounds, I'll just move on to the next point. Finally, I've also seen Disney putting a lot of emphasis on expanded materials recently. After they bought Lucasfilms, solely because they wanted to make Star Wars movies, not long after that purchase was made, they officially declared that every piece of expanded material that came out before that purchase was no longer official. I mean, A lot of it was not official anyway because there were a lot of contradictions and alternate timelines and whatnot, but they declared all of it, no matter how good or how closely it followed the lore, none of it counted anymore. But they were going to be making new stuff that was official. New novels, new games, new shows, all of which were going to be officially part of the story. And they are also going to be putting a greater emphasis on this moving forward with the Marvel Cinematic Universe post-Avengers Endgame. It is apparently going to be required that you watch the Marvel shows debuting on Disney Plus if you want to understand the movies going forward. Particularly Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, according to most sources, won't make sense unless you see at least WandaVision. Probably more, but at least that one. Which I think is a huge mistake, but I'll get into why later. So we have a lot of emphasis these days being put on multimedia tie-ins, and I've said occasionally in the past that I think this is a huge mistake. I just said it, in fact. But I did get a question in my Q&A, the second Q&A that I'm doing, and still working on. There are a lot of questions to sift through. I'll get to the next part eventually. But I got one question in particular which asked, do I ever see a period where multimedia tie-ins will be vital? Like, do I ever see that becoming a mainstream thing? And I have to say my answer is no, I don't see it happening. And anyone who tries to make it happen is in for a huge letdown, because it is destined to fail. Which is what's prompting this video to finally be made, because I do think we need to really explore the idea of what purpose multimedia tie-ins actually serve. The thing is, stuff like prequel novels or video game tie-ins or things like that, they are for the hardcore enthusiasts. When you have a thing that is big enough that it's got a global fan base, then you know that there's an audience to go into a slightly more niche medium and perhaps expand a little, provide them with even more stuff to experience. Like, these days, everybody watches Star Trek. Star Trek used to be a niche thing, but since then it's become a global phenomenon, and it's basically gotten to the point where, yes, there's still that hardcore fandom, but pretty much everybody watches Star Trek in one form or another, even if they only just watch the movies or just watch the shows. But at the same time, like I said, you still have that hardcore fandom. And they are the sort of people who will experience Star Trek in other ways. So if you made a video game with a Star Trek license, or you wrote a Star Trek novel or a Star Trek comic, then those people are going to go and seek out that stuff. And what you can do in those things is to expand the world, provide those extra adventures that might not be possible to do in TV or movies for whatever reason. Or to take things in new directions, set up alternate realities, things like that. And they're not meant to replace the main story, but they're meant to enhance it. Like, if you can use it to put that extra little bit of lore in there to make the characters more three-dimensional or the world more expansive, then that's what those are for. They aren't really vital to people enjoying the core things. They're not vital to enjoying the movies or the shows. But for the hardcore fans, people like me, we love that sort of thing. It really enriches the experience for us. But then again, that very thing which makes expanded material so cool is also something that holds it back quite significantly. Because it's not necessarily that you are tied to the source material, but more that you cannot really do anything that interferes too much with it. For the most part, anyway. Let's say, for example, you have a movie, and for the most part, it's self-contained. Every bit of information you really need is in there. But there are certain elements, like what certain characters were doing before the events of the movie, that are only alluded to, only touched upon briefly. You still get everything you need to know so you can experience the story and know who that character is, but there's no expansion on what that character was really doing. Well, you commission someone to write a prequel novel for you, and that tells that story that was only hinted at, but that story, whatever it is, has to fit within the confines of what the world already established, and it eventually has to get them to a point where now the actual movie can begin. They have to get to that point, or else the prequel winds up just being a contradiction. Which, like I said, that can really enhance the experience for a hardcore fan. For a writer, though, I can't imagine it's a very exciting prospect. Interestingly, Star Wars and Star Trek both had different ways of getting past that, of doing away with the restriction to allow for creative freedom. And they're very different methods, but ultimately they each get the same result. Star Wars and Star Trek, you have to understand, have a lot of expanded material in every conceivable medium you can think of. And in some cases, you get stuff in that expanded material that rivals even the official canon. But how do they get there? Well, like I said, two different paths. With Star Wars, for a long time, there were only 3 movies. A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi. That was it. I mean, there was a holiday special, but we don't talk about that. Anyway, those 3 movies, that was the whole story. Beginning, middle, end. That leaves a lot of potential to go before or after. And there was no worry about ever having to get overridden by the movies. I mean, for a long time, it seemed like that was really going to be it. We didn't know the prequels were ever going to happen. There were always rumors, but there was a wide gap before we got even rumblings that George Lucas actually was going to do it. So you had plenty of people going backward, and even after the official prequel movies were made and rendered all the expanded universe prequel stuff more apocryphal, you still had after Return of the Jedi. So that was the story. All that expanded material, that was Star Wars for a very long time. That was what was bringing the story and the characters and the universe forward. And so they had to be really good. And because there were no plans officially to do anything afterward, that meant you could go in these new directions. You could introduce a whole bunch of new characters, new locations, new technologies. You could bring the characters who were already established in the movies into some bold new directions. You had that freedom. As long as you stuck to the core rules of the universe, you could explore the vastness of it as much as you wanted. And as a result, these things had to be really good. And Star Wars, of course, was big enough that it wouldn't just necessarily be the hardcore fans who were experiencing this sort of thing. It might also just be regular old sci-fi fans who liked Star Wars, they were looking for something new to read. Hey, this looks interesting. Star Wars book? Sure, I'll give it a read. Meanwhile, with Star Trek, a different approach was taken. There was a brief period where the expanded material was the only material. That point between the end of the original series and the debut of the motion picture. And they went to some weird places, let me tell you. But eventually, Gene Roddenberry put his foot down and said that the only stuff that is official Star Trek canon are the live-action shows and the live-action movies, which, not coincidentally, he was involved with. So that was basically him proclaiming that he was gathering up all of his toys and going home and only he could play with them. So, kinda selfish, but then again, Star Trek was the only real success Gene Roddenberry ever had, so understandable he'd want to keep his mitts on it for as long as he could. But of course, that proclamation didn't stop expanded material from happening. Ultimately, it was the studio that would still decide whether or not they would give the license, or sell the license as it were, to make a video game, or a comic book or something. And the result of Gene Roddenberry declaring that that stuff wasn't official actually lifted a lot of restrictions, because now you didn't have to worry about potentially contradicting what was already in Star Trek. Given that Star Trek is already episodic anyway, and you combine that with the fact that what you're writing will never be official, you can write any kind of story. You want an anthology spanning all 4 live-action series where each individual crew encounters the same alien menace? Sure, you can do that. You want a story where the X-Men wind up on the Enterprise D? Go for it. You want a story with a completely original cast of characters on a completely new ship that exists independently of the Enterprise? There are several of those. You want to translate the works of William Shakespeare into Klingon based on a throwaway gag from Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Country? That's just crazy enough to work. And it always did for some reason. Granted, not all of it was ever good. Not all of it could be, statistically speaking. But because it existed independently of the official canon, you had the freedom to tell some really good stories and not have to worry about there being contradictions. And of course, because so many sci-fi writers are also fans of Star Wars and Star Trek, that made the prospect of writing for either of those series quite a desirable one. And they could have that freedom to write the kind of story they wanted to write. These days, that's different, particularly for Star Wars. Like I said, Disney made the official proclamation that all of the previous expanded materials don't count anymore, but the stuff that's made under their watch does count. It is official. It does tie into the movies and will always be canon. So now the prospect of writing for Star Wars looks a bit more like this. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much for bringing me onto this project. I am a lifelong fan of Star Wars, and I have always wanted to write my own Star Wars novel. So thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. Yeah, we're proud to have you on board. We just have a couple of notes for you before you start writing, okay? Notes? Okay, I can deal with that. What have you got? Okay, so for starters, our script is already locked, and we're shooting next week, so no changes are going to be made on our end. So any new characters you introduce have to be out of the story by the last page, and given a good reason as to why they're not going to be in the film, okay? Okay. I mean, that's basically just telling me to write a character with a complete story arc. Any author worth his salt can do that. Good. And also you have to do the same thing for any new technologies or abilities or species that you might introduce. Okay, I guess I understand that. But I can still use the characters and ships and abilities from the movies, right? Absolutely, we encourage you to use the movie characters, as long as they're from the new trilogy, because that's who we're really pushing. Well, I don't really have any attachment to those characters, but okay, I guess I can work with that. Beautiful, but just make sure they don't go through anything too life-changing, alright? Remember, our script is already locked, and we want there to be a smooth transition from the last movie to the next movie. So, no life-altering things for them. We will be telling you to nix it if you try to sneak something through. Oh, and before I forget, depending on how the test screenings go, we might be asking you to fill in a couple of plot holes with your novel. You know, throw in some things in there to explain why something that doesn't make sense in the movie actually does make sense. So, just to make sure I understand this, you want me to write a story with no character development, no original ideas, and no lasting consequences, and at some point you'll be calling me and telling me what to put in to cover up your mistakes? Now you're getting it. Glad we're on the same page. Now be sure to have it ready in time for the holidays. We'll be in touch. Bye. So this is my dream come true. Well, at least it's a paycheck. Yeah? You do know we're taking most of the profits from this, right? Yeah, I figured. At least that much is familiar to me. And that, I think, is a problem with a lot of expanded material. It's expected to not interfere with the core story, therefore, you can't really do much with it. Like, I said I own the graphic novel prequels for the MonsterVerse movies. doesn't necessarily mean I think they are especially good. Godzilla Aftershock, for example, I remember so many people thinking that you would have to read it before seeing Godzilla King of the Monsters, or else King of the Monsters wouldn't make any sense. I always was pretty certain that wouldn't be the case. Turns out I was right. Aftershock is just an overly long explanation for why Godzilla's dorsal plates look different between movies, which is such an unimportant detail that I'm not even sure most mainstream audiences would have even noticed. But then there's that other question. Do I believe a time will ever come when the expanded materials really will be necessary? Will there ever be a time where you do have to read the prequel graphic novel and watch the viral marketing and play the video game just so you can understand the main movie? I mean, like I said, Disney's trying to push it with Marvel going forward. You will have to watch the Disney Plus shows in order to understand the theatrically released movies. I think that's going to fail and fail hard. And in fact, there is precedent for this sort of thing failing hard, which means Disney really should have known better. Back in 2004-ish, there was a movie released called Southland Tales. It's the kind of movie that thinks postmodernism is an excuse for terrible writing. But, well, other people have analyzed the horrors of why Southland Tales is a terrible movie. But it's relevant to our conversation because it actually tried to do exactly what we're talking about. It tried to make the expanded material necessary. You see, Southland Tales the movie is actually the second half of a story. The first half was told across 3 issues of a comic book series. A limited comic book series, of course, but a comic book series all the same. 3 issues, together that was the first half of the story. If you didn't read those and you only saw the movie, which is the second half of the story, you would have no clue what was going on. And this proved to be the case during test screenings, when people came out and hated it. Didn't know what was going on, didn't know who the characters were, didn't know why the world was the way it was. It was not good. It basically forced the filmmakers to slap together a very basic sort of prologue at the beginning, but otherwise leave the film unaltered, and you were still expected to read those comics. That is, if you could find them. I never saw them anywhere, and I was looking. But even if you could find them, the fact of the matter is, comics are still kind of a niche medium, and they were definitely still a niche medium back when this movie was released. Mainstream audiences, back then and today, just don't read comics. They'll watch stuff that's based on comics, sure, but they're not actually going to go back and read them most of the time. Some of them might, but most of them won't. So, choosing to do that first half of the story in a medium that most people still didn't take seriously at the time, that was another mistake. And the next mistake was assuming people would want to do that anyway. See, I've spoken at this point about how the reason most tie-in material isn't really consequential to the story is because it can't interfere with what's coming next, with the official stuff. But the other reason is because you don't want to put anything so important in there that not having it ruins the experience. If it's important to understanding the story, it should be in the main part of the story. And here, with Southland Tales, the entire first half of the story, which I would think is very important, was taken away and placed in a medium that most people weren't going to read. You're essentially telling your audience in that instance, you've got to do homework first. And nobody wants to do that. Nobody actually likes being told you have to do this before you can do that. If you want to watch a movie, all you want to do is watch a movie. You just want to sit down in a theater or in front of the TV or your computer and watch a complete story with a beginning, a middle, and an ending. Get the whole experience in one go, credits roll, you eject the DVD, or you walk out of the theater, and you get dinner. That's all people want. They don't want to have to go and track down some other kind of thing that will take them more time and cost them more money just so they can experience the movie they want to experience. That is generally considered to be an annoyance. Hence, the other reason why most tie-in materials don't feature anything of consequence happening in them, or feature explanations for details so minor that you could probably go your whole life without ever knowing they were part of the story. And in case you were wondering about whether or not reading the comics did make Southland Tales better, no. So basically, Southland Tales failed because of what Disney is trying to do going forward with Marvel. And that is not a good thing. I am fairly certain that Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness is not going to be a movie. Rather, I think it's going to be a 2-hour-long advertisement for Disney+. Hey, want to know what this was all about? Gotta watch the Marvel shows on Disney+. Confused by where that character came from? You wouldn't be confused if you had Disney+. Don't understand why there's suddenly a huge multiverse out there with so many different versions of these characters? Well, gee, if only you had Disney+. You should totally sign up for Disney+ when you get home. By the way, did we mention buy Disney+? I hope that's not what's going to happen, but then again, the original director left because of creative differences, so that's not a good sign that this is going to be a non-corporate venture. So Disney's probably going to learn the hard way that this isn't going to work. Which, if that's what it takes, then that's what it takes. But for my own part, I don't think they even should have tried from the beginning. I do not think, nor will I ever think, that tie-in materials and expanded materials should ever be essential. They are fun, but if you need them to understand the main story, that's not good. Show me a franchise that needs a bunch of other material to explain the core story that everyone will experience. I'll show you an incomplete story. That's just the long and the short of it. So like I said, I enjoy expanded material. I own several examples of expanded material for things that I really like. But I do not think they are essential. And I don't think they ever should be considered essential. Your priority should always be on crafting a good story and having the extra material be extra material. Stuff that you experience if you want to, but not because you need to. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like it as well as subscribe to the channel for more content of a similar nature. Also, check the description for links to our Twitter, DeviantArt, and Patreon pages, as well as the Amazon link for the novel Operation Red Dragon: The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, penned by yours truly. Thank you all, and we appreciate your support.